Fields, take 3, now with 1.7% less so, and ah, and maybe a little bit less swearing too. G'day Bifrosters, let's talk about fields. Yeah, take 3. I'm going to leave that in too. Fields. Fields are a mysterious force that permeate the universe. They really do. You can think of them as an array of values for every point inside your space. And inside those values, they can be a value like 7 or 14 or 3.1 or 768.2. They can be a single value. That's a scalar field. So that would be, I have a grid of oranges. What is the radius of every orange? A field would store that information for you. Or it could be, here is a cube of air and the wind is blowing through it. What direction and how fast is the wind going at any given point in that field? That's a vector field. So far we have fields. They permeate the universe. They come in 2 flavors, scalar and vector. And they're used to describe things. They're kind of like the describing words of the universe. I stretched that metaphor too thin. Let me just show you what they do. So here's the remnants of the last 2 takes of this tutorial. I've even got my little rotational thing up there. And straight away, we're not going to use any of that. Let us put down a scalar field. Now, I could just do this. I could put down a scalar field, and I could put down a scalar field scope. Like this. Like that. And we could have a look at that field. There is nothing in it, because there is nothing in that field. Let's put down a value. Now this is going to be the radius of our oranges. Let's call it 1. And we'll plug that in there. And suddenly we have 20 by 20 by 20 meters of oranges that are black. Why they're black? Well, that would be because I turned the light off. And I've got usual lights on. So if I use default lighting, they're red. They're not quite orange. But let's just pretend they're whatever 20 by 20 by 20 meters oranges are. So what's that? That's something like 8,000 square meters of oranges, cubic meters of oranges that are red and that are all radius 1. I can use this guy, this scope. This is just for display. So if I take this to 0.05 and make them very, very tiny, they are still a radius of 1. They're just being displayed. Now if I say I don't want to see quite this big of a slice of the universe, so if we go -5, -5, -5, 5 by 5, now I've got 10 by 10 by 10 meters. The field is still the same, whether it's 5 by 5 or 30 by 30. Now, you'd have to change the divisions to get the same density of oranges, but every point inside that field that you care to sample will still be a radius of 1. Are you with me so far? The adjectives of the universe. I actually quite like that, even though it's terrible. Let's do something just a little more interesting. First thing I need to do is get rid of that cube. I don't want to see a cube of things anymore. So Bifrost lets you take your scalar field scope and add some probe geometry. If you get the chance, go and watch the Maya Guy's video where he plays around with fields. It's brilliant to watch. It's also the best use of the word Bosch in the YouTube video. I believe he won some kind of award. If we come in real close, you can see that there are still lots and lots and lots of sears. Let's make them smaller so we can see what they're doing. There we go. Except this time, instead of me being able to control how many they are, it is just putting them on the points of that mesh. And there are quite a few points in that mesh. So let's spread them out a little bit. So once more, we have a slice through the universe. And for every point on that slice, we are getting an orange with a radius of 1. Getting sick of our red oranges that don't fit my metaphor anymore, so do something a little bit more interesting. Put down a fractal noise field. And let's plug that in. It's a little harder to see. Things are getting a little more interesting, but you can see there is variation in this field. These ones are bigger and rounder, and these ones are smaller. They're all different colors, showing me the value at each point in that field. If I wanted to see more of it, I could increase the segments. I could increase the size. You can see this really is all throughout the universe, or in just this little part of it. But this is now giving me a representation of the values in that field at these positions. If I want to see all of it, what's happening is the field extends below as well. So the field is negative and positive values, because the fractal noise comes out, I think, at about minus 0.5 to 0.5. But if I want to see every point, and this is just display, it's not changing the field. I'll show you how that works in a minute. Just pull this up to a quarter or even an eighth, just to see what's going on there. Great. Now we have an interesting field. I can change, say, the seed of this, and I'll get a different field. And again, a different field. And again, a different field. So this is noise. We can evolve this noise. Let's do that, see what it looks like. So we'll chuck down a time node. And because I happen to know that time runs really fast, I'll throw down a multiply. And we'll multiply what's coming out of there. We'll take the seconds, and we'll multiply that by a value like this. We'll make that value, say, 0.2, just to slow it down a bit. Now, you might notice that that's green, and that's orange, and that breaks. Because this is a field, for some reason it wants a field to go into the time, and we don't know what kind of field until we hover over it. It wants a scalar field. That's nice and easy. We had one of those before that was doing nothing. So let's put down a scalar field. And this is the lovely thing about Bifrost and fields. I can plug anything into this scalar field as long as it's scalar value. So at this point I'm plugging in the seconds multiplied by 0.2, going into there, becoming a scalar field being plugged into the time. Now if I play this, you can see the noise changing as the time variable changes. And this is starting to look a bit more interesting than just 10 cubic meters of oranges, right? Or reds. If an orange is red, is it called a red? If a fly doesn't have wings, is it called a walk? Anyway, all good. The field's evolving. If I change this number, the field should evolve a bit faster. It does start to look a bit more interesting. It's maybe a little fast for my taste. Of course, when it's your field, you can do whatever you like with it. The next thing I have a burning desire to do is maybe visualize this field. What can we use this field for? Well, you can use fields for a lot of things. What I'm going to use it for is to generate some sort of landscapey type stuff. So I'm going to take my mesh. I'm going to get its points and normals, like this. And I'm also going to throw down a sample field. So just like locations and closest positions and rays, I need to sample this field, and I need to sample it at certain positions, because right now, before I plug the position in, this thing is all across the universe, and once more we run into this huge memory hole that is trying to render reality, or even simulate it. So I'm going to give it a bunch of positions to look at. And just like every other sample node in Bifrost, this simply says, sample this thing at this position. Yeah? Great. We're all good. I have some numbers. I need to do things with those numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm going to grab an add node. This is just like doing a noise displace. And I'm going to just throw in the value. And just like every other Bifrost tutorial in the world, I'm going to just do a whole bunch of stuff and then tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to plug this here into the y of that vector. And then I'm going to add that to my points. Then I'm going to construct some points. And I do this for a very definite reason, for which I can't remember right now. Like I said, take 3. Then I throw the points in and we'll take a look at them. And suddenly you've got these mountainy looking things. So now we have a bunch of points that you can see are evolving with the field. Now you can see these ones underneath. It's not really displaying that, but it's enough to give you an idea. Immediately what I start to think of here, and if we maybe do something a bit different, if we just go to set geoproperty, set point positions rather, set point position, those positions, that geometry, pop that out so we can take a look at it. And let's show some wireframes on those so we can get to the idea. All of a sudden that's starting to look pretty watery. So this is one way to make water. Now maybe that's a little bit big, so I can come back to my fractal noise and I can just change it so that it doesn't have as much magnitude. Let's just super quickly turn that off. I see what the field, you see how the field is a lot more subdued. It's still evolving, but it's a lot more subdued. And again, you can change all sorts of things in here. You can make it a lot more complicated. Maybe half as big so you can start to see things a bit better. It's a little more complicated now, but not quite as intense. Take a look and see what our mesh is doing. I'll just turn on X-ray here so you can get a better idea. You can see a lot more detail in the surface now. Or maybe we want to pop that down a bit less. So it's a lot simpler. Anyway, you can see what I'm doing with this field now is I'm sampling it and I'm sticking it into the Y value of this mesh. And we're getting something that's really quite interesting. Next question, how do we move this? What happens if we want this to all go that way? Well, this is where a vector field comes in. Let's make a vector field. We'll make a really simple vector field. To make a vector field, which is a field that stores a bunch of movement information, first thing you need is a vector. Now, you can make a vector field lots of different ways at lots of different things. I want to move this in the X, so I'm going to give this a value of 4. Grab this guy and just make it a vector field. Like this. And I'm going to have a vector field scope so we can see what our vector field's doing. I'll plug in our probe geometry and let's just output this to proxy again. And that looks kind of big. What these are arrows. They are arrows that are 4 units long. Change that back to 1 or even 0.1. You can see all the arrows that have shown up. That's this. Take them away. I can bring them back. Oops, wrong thing. Take the arrows away, bring the arrows back. So it's essentially the same thing. It's every point in the universe with a vector that has a value of 0.100, which means it's moving in the X, like this. So enough waffling. Let's see what it's doing. Not much. Because what we need to do is we need to move this field. Those are the scopes. We need to move this field with this field. Bifrost has a node for that. Advec field. Advec just means to move with. So let's turn off our, not that, let's turn off this for the moment. And I might just disconnect this scope in a minute as well. In fact, I'm definitely going to disconnect this scope, so we'll just get rid of that. So here's our field again. So I'm going to take my scalar field, pop it in here. Tell it's a scalar field if you hover over it. So I want to move my scalar field with my vector field. Let's plug the vector field into there. We'll come back to time step in a second. Now what comes out of here is still a scalar field. So let's plug that in. And when I play it, nothing much happens. It sits there and does its evolution thing. That's because, if you read here, it vects a scalar or vector field along a velocity field for the length specified by the time step. So right now, we have nothing plugged into our time step. If I change this time step manually, you should be able to see the field move. And we can. So luckily we have a time node back here that we're multiplying down, and this isn't a field. So we can just go straight out of our time that we're multiplying by a third. And let's speed that up a bit so we can maybe see what's happening. You can see it's slowly moving across, but because we've got the evolution of the field tied to exactly the same time as the motion of the field, it's getting a little difficult to see. So I'm just going to take this guy, I'm going to plug it straight into seconds. And that's not helping us much either. What if I take frame? There we go. That's what we're looking for. So every frame, this is moving it by 0.5 in the x direction. That's why we couldn't see much before, because 0.5 is quite small. Take 1, I'll go back to seconds instead of frames. Still not quite fast enough. What happens if we put in a 5? Now that's more like it. So it's still evolving at a fairly high rate. I'll change the evolution speed so it's slower, but we're still moving at quite a fast rate. So it's moving along and it's evolving at the same time. Stop that. I'm just going to turn back our mesh so we can see the effects on the mesh like this. Now the mesh isn't working really well because I haven't plugged the advect field into this sample field, which is what's driving the mesh. So once we do that, now you can really see it's moving and evolving at the same time. And what this puts me in mind of is the final thing we're going to do with meshes, just to show you what they can do, and then I'll let you go. You can go field to volume. We'll take our advect field, pop it in here, tell it that I want a fog density. Volume mode can be solid for now. Store fog density is fine. We've got our bounds again. Now I can plug in a proxy object here, but it doesn't really work that well, and I haven't worked out why yet. Don't forget I'm still learning this as well. So what I'm going to do is what I found that did work. Something like this. Resolution mode is fine. And let's output the volume as well. Let's maybe give it a bit of density. So what happens if we go to -5, -5, 5, the fog density, yeah, 20. Let's get it really dense. Lighting, use our lights. You guys see what I'm getting at here? Unplug the diagnostic. I've now got very, very low res and reasonably fast moving clouds. If I want to up the res, I just need to make this a bit smaller. So you can see they're changing. I'll change my speed variable here so they maybe change a bit faster. Now you can really see them changing and evolving as they go. So that's fields. That's very, very quick and dirty fields. I'll be doing another one where we talk about a bit more of the more advanced stuff. We talk about using kill noise fields and all kinds of cool stuff. But hey, go ahead and play with it. See what you think of it. See what you can work out. That's now evolving way too fast. And yeah, so just to really quickly recap, we talked about the difference between scalar and vector fields and how a field is going to do it again. A field is the universe's adjective. A scalar field describes single numbers, the size of things, the weight of things, the heat of things, the wobbliness of things, whereas a vector describes movement. But they're all arranged in a grid that exist in all places of the universe, but we only want to look at it in a little part of the universe, or else we run out of memory. So what we did is we set up a fractal noise field. I'll just turn off our clouds for a second, and I'm just going to disconnect this guy. Wow, why have I still got that guy? That guy needs to go away. Disconnect that guy. Let's disconnect our volume. So just look at our field again. There we are. So we set up a field, fractal noise field, that did some nice evolving. We then plugged in, we then made our own vector field out of a single vector. We advected the field with our vector field. We had a look at that as well, but they can go. And we saw how we could then change the evolution of the noise and then the movement of the field. Then to get the field out into something useful, we sampled it and put it on the points of a mesh like this. Like this. There we are. Go back to our default lighting. You can see how quick this is as well. So we talked about sampling this field at this position and then converting it into a Y position for a mesh. And then finally we did field to volume, where we made some insanely quick and dirty clouds and rolled them across the screen. Alright, so I hope that's starting to demystify fields for you. It really helped me to sit down and work this out. And I shall probably be doing a deeper dive on them later on. I'll add it to my list. Hey, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.